Coast to coast, border to border, and around the world, it's time for The Bill Alexander Show. The Bill Alexander Show is a guest-driven program where the topics are diverse and entertaining. Laugh and learn while you listen to one of the best hours of online radio. Now, here's your host, Bill Alexander.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Bill Alexander Show with yours truly, William Eric Alexander. All my friends call me Bill. And this evening we have an author who is on the program about his new book. The name of the book is When You Step Upon a Star, and our author is William Keck. William, how are you doing this evening?
Hey, Bill, I'm doing great. I'm so excited to speak to you today, from one William to another.
So give us a little background of who you are.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, well, let's see. I mainly have worked as a celebrity journalist for on and off for 30 years. I took little side routes as a TV producer and talent booker. But primarily the stories in my book are about my 25 years as a celebrity journalist for such magazines as USA Today and Entertainment Weekly and People, Us Weekly, papers like the Los Angeles Times. And then a lot of the stories are from my years at the National Enquirer as a tabloid bad boy.
So what's the book all about?
Well, it starts out, it's a narrative about a young boy growing up in upstate New York who lost his dad when he was 5, no brothers and sisters. So I kind of adopted the TV families as my own. I sort of lived vicariously through the Brady Bunch and the Ewings of Dallas and the Carringtons of Dynasty. And I guess a lot of kids do that. But what separated me from others is that I actually came out to California to meet them. And actually, I ended up reuniting them for TV specials in a lot of ways. But I also encountered them in ways that weren't great. During my years at the Enquirer, I was asked to crash funerals and weddings and hospital rooms. So the book is also sort of my mea culpa, my apology to them, taking accountability and coming full circle.
So do you give stories about crashing funerals or going to the hospital room? I mean, do you give stories about that in the book?
Oh yeah, that's the entire book. There's 39 chapters, and it's by celebrity. And the first section actually is, I will tell you, actually, I'll read you the section titles. I'm not going to read all the chapters because we'd be here forever. But the first part is Disturbing the Dead and Near Dead. Then Down and Dirty, which are the kind of naughty stories where I cross paths with celebrities at nudist colonies and in Vegas. And then part 3 is Dangerous Divas, when I'm encountering people like Joan Collins and Elizabeth Taylor, Britney Spears. And then I end with Domestic Disturbances, and those are the wedding crashing and new baby hospital crashing stories. It's pretty wild. I can't believe I did all it, but I did, and I survived to tell about it.
So you're actually naming names in the book?
Oh yeah, I name every name. There's only one chapter near the end that I can't name the celebrity, and that's the celebrity who actually beat me up. He was a 1990s sitcom star who wasn't at all happy that I was coming to his house to talk to him about some information that the Enquirer had received. And because we had signed some papers at the time, I'm not allowed to reveal his name, but readers may be able to read between the lines. I give a few guesses.
Can you name the TV show?
No. Absolutely not. That would really narrow it down.
How about the co-stars? Anybody else?
I can't. You get 38 chapters with me naming everybody. That's the one chapter that's off limits. I wish I could, believe me.
So when writing this book, and as you said, you were doing this for 25 years, what made you want to go into work for the National Enquirer of all places?
Well, I was working for Aaron Spelling Productions first, the creator of Dynasty and Charlie's Angels and Love Boat. And it was fun, but I really, again, celebrities, the legends were dying off left and right. Jimmy Stewart and Sammy Davis Jr. And the Enquirer offered me a path to get to interview them, meet them right away. And actually, the way it began was I was working at the Johnny Carson show during Johnny's final months on the air. And Johnny was asking, not specifically Johnny, his team, they were asking us to seat the audience members who were older in the back. They wanted just kind of young, good-looking people up front, very ageist. I felt it was completely hypocritical since Johnny himself was a senior citizen.
Right.
I mentioned to a friend, the friend had been selling stories to the Enquirer, and he said, they'd be very interested in the story, and they were. And that established a relationship with the Enquirer that lasted for 3 years.
So did you get fired from the Carson show after you released that, or?
No, 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 no. It's all spelled out in the book. I worked for spelling, and I also then was working as a CBS page, an NBC page.
Okay.
I ended up actually going back east to finish up college, and then came back and worked for the Enquirer. So it's kind of a puzzle piece of overlapping jobs with these amazing legends.
So in the book, you're talking about these stars. Is there any star in particular that gives you a memory that you like looking back on?
Oh my gosh, I mean, so many. What's fun about the book is that Kelsey Grammer, who played Frasier, he
Yes.
still is playing Frasier. He's back on Paramount Plus. When he wrote his book, his memoir, he devoted 2 pages to me by name. And there's a little blurb on the back of the book. He called me a despicable piece of flesh, who he invited to burn in hell. And he said, "Your mother must be very, very proud." So he told his version of things, didn't get it exactly right. So all these years later, I'm telling my version of things, the accurate version, with all the information out there. And I also give his ex-fiance a chance to respond. She writes a page commentary about how their therapist broke up with her. He broke up with her via their therapist, who ended the engagement, and then that led to her contemplating suicide. So there's a lot of juice, a lot of people responding in here. Some celebrities actually take the opportunity to respond to their stories. Melissa Gilbert, I crashed her wedding in the day. She writes a page commentary. Bruce Willis is somebody else who threatened me, threatened to burn my house down. Bruce sadly can't speak, but his moonlighting co-star, Sybil Shepherd, she wrote a page on his behalf.
So was it odd reaching out to these people to respond to your stories?
In some instances, yes. But also in the last 30 years, I have made amends with them. I've worked with them. So in that case, it really wasn't that strange. Some of them I had to remind. I reminded them how we first met. So, I mean, for instance, Linda Gray from Dallas has known me from my years as a TV producer and working for TV Guide, USA Today. But I had to remind some of these people that back in the day I crossed their paths when I was a tabloid bad boy for the Enquirer. So that came as a surprise to some.
So you only worked for the National Enquirer for 3 years.
That's correct, but it was an amazing 3 years. It was during the O.J. Simpson trial, and so that was when the Enquirer went from being a joke to one of the leading sources of breaking news. Places like the L.A. Times, New York Times were suddenly complimenting the Enquirer for breaking the stories.
It's hard to believe that was in 1995. I mean,
it's amazing. Those murders were 30 years ago this past June.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It just amazes me that it took that long, and then something has finally been resolved, I guess. So
well, by him dying, I guess. I mean, maybe that gives the people some closure in a way, but I mean, he never paid the civil suits that he was supposed to pay.
Right.
He owed the Brown family and the Goldman family millions when he died.
So some of the stars that you've worked with, who was the first one you crossed paths with?
Oh my goodness. I write about the Brady Bunch a lot. I really wanted to meet the Bradys. And I ended up at the Enquirer doing a series of stories with the Bradys. The first one was the actress who played Cindy Brady, Susan Olsen, who was, she spent a couple days in prison for a DUI. And most celebrities would hang up the phone if you called about something like that. Susan Olsen has an amazing sense of humor. She came on the phone, talked about what led to the DUI. But even though she gave a great interview, the Enquirer embellished it. I turned in my reporting based on the interview I had with Susan, but they always wanted to make it a little funnier, a little more salacious. So they added quotes. And by they, I mean some editors in New York. There were these 3 kind of mysterious older men who would just kind of take our stories and embellish. And so all of a sudden there were quotes about Susan saying that one day I'll be senior citizen Cindy and they'll be putting my gray hair up in curls. She didn't say these things, but again, Susan had a great sense of humor and looked the other way. But a lot of celebrities, as you can imagine, were not happy to see that words had been put in their mouths.
That First off, it doesn't surprise me, but yet on the other hand, it does surprise me that they embellished so much to make the story more interesting or more entertaining to the readers. Did you
Yes.
ever object to it?
Oh my gosh. I mean, absolutely, I did. Absolutely. I mean, one of the most embarrassing, horrible stories was my very first assignment. I had zero sources. I didn't know how to go about being a tabloid reporter. And they sent me out with another young buck reporter who'd been hired, a guy named Brad. And they said, do what he does. He's a star here. Just follow his lead. Well, our story was to go to a hospital room in Northern California where an actor from a primetime soap was dying of AIDS, and we were supposed to get his deathbed interview. Well, we made a couple trips to his room, and he wasn't there. And Brad said, "Okay, we're good." I'm like, "Well, how can we be good? We didn't even see him much. Let's get an interview." He says, "No, we got enough to write a story." I watched as Brad fabricated an entire deathbed interview with this actor. I was horrified. I asked for my byline to be removed from the story. The actor ended up not dying in this hospital. He died at home. So I also said this can't be a deathbed interview. But I didn't have any power then. So my name appeared in that completely fabricated deathbed interview. Fortunately, Bill, that's not the way things worked. And if my boss, the editor in chief, had found out what Brad was doing, he would have been let go long before he had a chance to do such a thing.
So, because a lot of people think the National Enquirer or magazines like that, they made up their stories, and or there was a bit of truth and they embellished until there was like, I mean, just amazing things that were being said. When you
Yes.
told your stories, was it 100% truthful, 95% truthful whenever it went to print, or did they just manipulate everything?
Well, so the way it worked is the Enquirer did care about the truth. They spent a tremendous amount of money and manpower to fly us all over the world. I flew to Hawaii to do a jailhouse interview. I flew to Vail, Colorado to follow John Kennedy Jr. to see if his wife at the time, Carolyn Bessette, was pregnant. So we would turn in our reporting, but then, like I said, they would just try to make it a little bit more exciting. So if a couple was moving in together, they were about to get married.
Okay.
If a couple had an argument, they were on the verge of divorce. So they just heightened it. And one way they were able to do this, Bill, was that they would always say such and such celebrity told a friend. They would never say it was absolutely true what they were fabricating. They would say according to a source. So they could say, well, we didn't say it was true. We were just attributing that quote to somebody in their camp. So that happened all the time. And yes, in the book, I do talk about a couple times when they had me do that, and I end up getting in trouble because of that.
So with these stories, and you said you ran the cross paths of a lot of these people and they saw you coming, were they turning and running the other way like they would if paparazzi showed up, or were they there to confront you?
Well, unless I showed up at their door, which I did many times, they didn't know who I was. I mean, I was in my mid-20s then. I didn't look like, I guess, what you would say a typical tabloid reporter. You have a vision of that, and I was kind of more like Richie Cunningham. So I think people didn't suspect me when I walked into somebody's wedding. I tell a story in the book about Meredith Baxter Burney's wedding, the mom from Family Ties.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to cover her wedding reception, and I went to Target. I bought a $5 picture frame. I wrapped it very nicely, and I walked in with the other guests, laid my gift down on the table. Then my date and I mingled a bit. We waited till the people had taken their seats. There were a couple place cards left that hadn't been claimed. We took those names and sat down at the assigned table. And then when it was time for the cake cutting, I jumped up and got a nice picture of the cake cutting, and that picture ended up in that week's National Enquirer. That's the way it worked.
So how often did you do things like that where you came in under the disguise of something else?
I mean, all the time. Flower deliveries. I tell a story in the book about an actress, Connie Selica. She was on Hotel. She was on The Greatest American Hero. She's married to a lovely man. They're both lovely, named John Tesh. He's a musician. He hosted
Yes.
Entertainment Tonight for many years. When they had a new baby, I was sent to the hospital room to find out the baby's name, the birth weight. And I knew if I showed up as the Enquirer, they most likely would just tell me to get lost. So what I did in that case was I delivered flowers. And You know, it's in the book. I say that it was from a radio station that played John's music, and he was delighted. And I placed the flowers down and just kind of chatted them up. So all these years later, I called John, and he called me back. He was in the car with Connie, and they were very confused. How did you get this story? And I explained. John had a sense of humor about it. He laughed. Connie was horrified because she actually had been breastfeeding her baby at the time as I was getting the baby's name. But they are very forgiving Christians, and they supplied a photo of the three of them, all the grown-up daughter that's in my book. And Connie sent me a very nice message that's in the book about the power of forgiveness. Jesus preaches to forgive, and why shouldn't they as well? So very grateful to these people for giving me a second chance.
Is there anybody in the book that didn't forgive you for what you did?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I found that when I knew the celebrities, when I developed a relationship with them, mostly they responded. Mostly they took me up on the offer to contribute their thoughts. If I had to go through a publicist, I don't even know if the message got to them in several cases. They probably just didn't disturb them. Some celebrities asked to read the book. They did. They asked for changes. Some read the chapters and then declined to comment. So it was different in every case. But yeah, some of them I unfortunately didn't get to hear from. And others, Bill, others are dead. Others I couldn't get a reaction from. I mean, for instance, Dean Martin. I crashed his funeral by hiding in a tree. I was perched up in this tree as the mourners came in and signed the guest book and went into the chapel. So since I couldn't apologize to Dean, I reached out to one of his best friends, Rich Little, the impressionist. Okay. And Rich wrote 2 pages in my book about Dean's sense of humor and how he would have found that very funny. He sent me a photo of himself with Dean and Milton Berle and Frank Sinatra. And I asked Rich, I said, how do you think Frank Sinatra would have reacted if I crashed his funeral? And Rich said, oh, Frank would have taken an axe and chopped down that tree.
Yeah.
And then maybe came after me with the axe as well. And I think he's probably right.
That's funny. Other celebrity stories that you want to talk about that you think are a real great example of what you've done?
Well, I mean, we talked about the OJ story. That's one of the first stories in the book. 3 days after Nicole Brown Simpson was murdered, I was sent to get the first interview with the Browns in their home, about an hour south of Los Angeles. I knew that I wouldn't easily get into their gated community, so I tried flower delivery, groceries. None of that worked. So I ended up driving a little bit further to the Ritz-Carlton, and they had beachfront property that was next to the gated community where the Browns lived. So I valeted my car, jumped over a wall, ran on the beach in my suit and tie, jumped another wall. I was in the gated community. I worked my way up to the Brown family's address that I'd been given by my editor. I rang the doorbell. The housekeeper answered and said, how can I help you? I said, I'm here to see Mrs. Brown. The housekeeper led me into a room where Nicole's mother and 3 sisters were sitting around a portrait of Nicole crying. My heart was going boom, 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 boom. I never thought this would happen, that I would get this far. Mrs. Brown took my hand and said, thank you so much for coming. How did you know my daughter?
And how did you answer that?
Well, again, my mind was racing and I chose to tell the truth. Rather. I said, I'm so sorry for this horrible invasion of your privacy. I'm so sorry for the loss of your daughter. I'm with the Enquirer. And with that, they all sort of stood up and sort of walking me toward the front door. But Mrs. Brown, she said, what do you want? You made all this effort to come here. And I said, well, I guess I'd like to know how you told your grandchildren that their mother was gone. And Mrs. Brown, I guess, responded to the question. She actually wanted to shift the focus away from OJ to the victim, to her daughter, tell her daughter's story. She told me a lovely story about how she told the kids that mommy was an angel now, would always be looking out for them, and that the children now had 3 mommies, their grandmother and 3 aunts. I printed the story word for word. They appreciated the compassion, the honesty. And what happened, Bill, was it established a relationship between the Enquirer and the Browns that lasted for many years. And they used the Enquirer as Nicole's voice from the grave.
I'll be darned. Because with the passing of OJ, they hit the news all over again. And they were doing that. Did you ask them to write a letter for your book?
You know, wow. No one's asked me that question. I tried so hard. And Mrs. Brown passed a few years ago. The mother passed, but the 3 sisters are around. Some of them have had real problems of their own. But one of them, I believe Tanya, has gone into therapy. helping people heal. And I did think she would respond to my request to forgive, to write a commentary. Certainly no expectation. Again, I completely invaded their privacy at a very hard time. I didn't hear from any of them, and then soon afterwards, I found out that they were coming out with their own documentary that aired in conjunction with the 30th anniversary of the murder. So yeah, it would have been nice, but that's one I didn't get, Bill.
Is there a story that you were told to cover that you didn't want to cover?
I mean, sure. I remember when Andy Griffith's son overdosed and died. I had to call Andy and tell him that his son had passed. I did that, but Andy said, I'm sorry, I can't talk. He hung up, and then my editors were like, call him back. And I absolutely refused. They said, call his co-stars, Don Knotts and Jim Nabors. And I just couldn't do that. There was a time that I was in a high-speed chase with Elizabeth Taylor, and the woman was going to the hospital. We wanted to try to find out what hospital she was going to and what she was having done. The idea of chasing an old legend to the hospital was repulsive, so I pulled over. However, a few years later, I was in a high-speed chase with Britney Spears. That was for USA Today, and that one I was in it till the very end.
So, did the National Enquirer open doors for you for other journalism jobs?
Well, I would say it's the opposite. I think it
closed them
for me. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had to go into hiding right afterwards, so I quit after 3 years. I wanted to stay and do some on-the-record stories. They said I could stay and do these kind of fluff pieces, but it would be at half my salary. So I thanked them and moved on. The only place that would hire me was a soap opera magazine, Soap Opera Digest, and in a very short amount of time, I was upsetting the soap stars with these scandals that I was reporting about them. But that led to an opportunity to work for the Los Angeles Times, and that opened up all the doors to a staff position for 5 years at USA Today. I was a senior reporter and columnist for TV Guide for 6 years. So yeah, I mean, one way or another, it did. One door led to another, but it wasn't always directly so.
So some of these stories, how did you find out, or how did you get leads about these stories?
Well, paid sources. These celebrities have a lot of people in their circle. I mentioned Kelsey Grammer. Kelsey's own brother was selling stories on him, his half brother. I was very close to his fiance, as I mentioned. We were talking about things that were happening between them that ended up in the Enquirer. Nannies, nurses, people at police stations, people who just want to make some money, or they have an agenda to perhaps get revenge on somebody who they felt had wronged or disrespected them. They were everywhere. They still are.
Did you ever buy any information that you found out was wrong?
Yes, I didn't personally buy. I mean, the Enquirer
Oh, right.
of course, yes. But again, back to Kelsey, a horrible thing. We received a tip that Kelsey had tested HIV positive, which is absolutely 100% false, never true. But I was assigned to check it out, and I approached the fiance. The fiance told Kelsey what I didn't know is this news that I was sharing, this false news, came on the day of their engagement party. And as you can imagine, that did not set the stage for a very happy evening. So yeah, we got false information a lot of times. I actually have a quiz in the book. I have like a multiple choice with some stories that I typed up that turned out not to be true, but one of them did. And actually, the true story, I can say it now because she just passed away yesterday, was about Shannon Doherty. So sad that we lost her so early. But yeah, no, she has a place in my book about a story, a very scandalous story that we had information on that turned out to be truthful, but we didn't print it.
Were there things that you felt guilty about writing about after you did it?
Oh my gosh, I mean, all the time. I write in the book all about the guilt I was feeling. And, ultimately it was a photograph of Raquel Welch, the beautiful screen goddess Raquel Welch, that actually led me to resign. I was on vacation and coming back on the Staten Island ferry, and they had put the new Enquirers out on the newsstand. And I was curious if my story, one of my stories, would have made the cover. And I saw that none of mine did. All three stories on the cover were rather horrible, but the main one was of Raquel Welch just looking sad. A photographer, a paparazzi, had gotten a photo of her looking despondent. Her hair wasn't done. She didn't have makeup on. next to her photo, they put a photo of her all glammed up in her heyday. And the headline was something like the sad, lonely days of Raquel Welch. And I was like, good God, what am I doing? I have those days. I write a whole chapter in the book about my battle with depression. And I realized I did not want to be making money from other people's pain and suffering.
So when was the book released?
A few days ago.
Do you have any
And
idea how well it's doing?
it's doing really well. I mean, right before I came on here, I received a text that it is #1 among new releases of memoirs
Oh, cool.
and biographies. So yeah, it's climbing in all sorts of categories, journalist biographies and pop culture. So yeah, it's really exciting that people are discovering the book and giving a chance to judge me, condemn me, or forgive me.
So with the stories in this book, do you still have others? You have stories for a second book?
You know, I do. I do. I chose 39 of them, but there were about 80 chapters originally. For this one, I chose to do stories that are rather action oriented. Stories of me stealing garbage, being chased, chasing, hiding. It's all things. It kind of plays like a movie in that way. So yeah, but no, I have a whole filing cabinet full of other stories, and I saved everything, Bill. I saved every single tape recorded interview, every notebook with my notes about license plates that were coming and going, hospital room numbers, every clipping of every magazine I ever wrote for, and most importantly, every photograph. The book is loaded with like 200 photos that I took with celebrities over the years to prove that I was there speaking with them at the time.
You mentioned going through garbage. Is there anything that you wouldn't have done to get a story?
Well, I mean, when it was really exploiting somebody who had just lost someone, like I mentioned about Andy Griffith, I stopped doing that. Well, no, because I'll tell you, I this wasn't exactly for an assignment, but I was obsessed with the show Dallas as a kid, and specifically Victoria Principal. I was almost a stalker. I write in the book about a stalker that I had. It was a very scary experience, but if I stalked anybody, it would have been Victoria. And yeah, I mean, I actually she was married to a plastic surgeon, one of Beverly Hills top plastic surgeons, and I ended up making an appointment for a nose job and getting a nose job from her ex-husband, Dr. Harry Glassman, and through that, yes, I did meet Victoria. Then Victoria and I were close, and then we weren't close, and when she heard about the book, she gave me a call, and we had a lovely phone call, an hour phone call off the record. But I think we each absolved the other, and well, she had nothing to apologize for. I certainly did, but it was a nice call, but it's going to stay private between us.
Um, on your website, you have a response from Lindsay Wagner.
Yes, I do. I was very, very pleased to get that. I mean, next to Victoria Principal, I think Lindsay Wagner was somebody else that I was obsessed over. Love the Bionic Woman. But when I was at the Enquirer, I let them know. I said, if there's ever a chance to do a story on Lee Majors, the $6 Million Man, or Lindsay Wagner, the Bionic Woman, please let me do it. They called me to their office one day. They said, hey, Keck, it's your lucky day. We have a Lindsay Wagner story for you. I'm like, great. You know, where do I get to interview? They said, you don't get to interview her. You've got to go to her father's funeral.
Ooh.
And the story was to find out about the young boy toy she was dating. So a photographer and I went to the church. My license plate to this day is bionic. So I had to hide my bionic car behind the church because people would have thought there was a total stalker there. There was.
Right.
Photographer was in the bushes, got photos of Lindsay and her younger boyfriend. When I ran into Lindsay at the service, she took she extended her hand. We had a handshake, and she asked how I knew her dad. I said I didn't. I said I was with the Enquirer, and we had a photographer in the bushes who got a photo of the two of them. And she said, well, what do you want then? I said, well, maybe a caption. She said, well, I have a caption for you. F you. So luckily, Lindsay is a very forgiving, loving woman who believes in second chances. So yes, not only did Lindsay actually forgive me on that spot, she took over control of the narrative. She and her boyfriend were trying to launch a jewelry line, and the article in the Enquirer became all about their jewelry line. But yes, all these years later, Lindsay wrote a few sentences in support of the book and about the power of redemption. So
How
thank
about
you.
How about Barbara Eden?
Barbara Eden, I never had any run-ins with her. I did go to her house for a big story for TV Guide about her new book a few years ago. And Barbara was very nice to have a look at the book, and then she wrote a very nice quote and welcomed me to the bestsellers club.
And one more here, Adam West.
Well, Adam West didn't contribute a quote because he's long gone.
Right.
But Adam West, he was the one when said I flew to Hawaii to do a prison interview. His daughter, Adam West, TV's Batman, his daughter was in prison for trying to murder her in-laws. So I mean, this girl took a phone and hit it over her father-in-law's head, pow, like the TV show, and took a vase and knocked it over her mother-in-law's head, boom. And so she was in prison, and I had to go to the prison to interview her. I did get an interview with her, and I then left my card on Adam West's ex-wife's doorstep to see if I could get an interview with her. Well, instead of her calling, Adam called, and I thought he was just going to tear me apart, but instead he thanked me for flying to Hawaii and trying to get to the truth. Adam was so smart, he took control of the story, and by the time the story went to print, the headline was Grandpa Batman to the Rescue, Raising Kids While Daughter Does Time. So he supplied me a photo of him with his grandkids. So, the Enquirer was so shunned by celebrities that when a celebrity chose to do work with them, partner with them, the Enquirer would bend over backwards to be able to have that partnership. But they also didn't have lasting relationships. It was all about that moment, and they could shake hands with a celebrity one minute and stab them in the back the next, depending upon if something new were to break.
So any other story you'd like to share?
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's just so many stories about being escorted out of John Candy's funeral as his famous friends, Dan Aykroyd and Danny DeVito, were watching me being escorted out. That was absolutely horrible. I talk about, well, I haven't talked much about, it was Oscar night. I was having an Oscar party, and I got a call from my Enquirer editors that I had to follow Sean Penn to the hospital because his wife at the time, Robin Wright Penn, was miscarrying their baby. And what was bizarre about this was Sean had been up for an Oscar that night for Dead Man Walking. So when I got to the hospital and found him, he was in his tuxedo still, and we watched the Oscars together on this little hospital screen. And I watched as he watched when Nicolas Cage won instead. But I mean, there's so many strange stories of me being like Forrest Gump, a fly on the wall. And again, like I mentioned, the first three chapters are the Enquirer, or the first 3 years of the Enquirer, but then it goes on to me covering premieres and the Oscars and the Emmys. And the problem is even though I was invited to the party, even though I quit the Enquirer hadn't quit me. So I was still using the tricks of the trade to get these stories, but I was just doing it inside their homes and in their dressing rooms and on their sets. But it was quite a journey. And I do share a bit about my own personal growth as a human. I was sort of keeping secrets about my own life when I was exposing their secrets. So coming out publicly, honestly, as a human being, coincided with me cleaning up my professional life.
Do you feel better now that you wrote the book, that you're able to put some of this behind you?
Oh my gosh. I mean, absolutely. I made peace with a lot of them, person by person, but getting it all out there. And I also end each chapter, Bill, with a lesson learned. These horrible things happen, but you either learn from them or you don't. I did. And so these lesson learned, I believe, are lessons that everybody can relate to in their own lives. You can't change the past, but you can change how you look at the past. And just because you were a certain way in your childhood, in your 20s or 30s, doesn't mean that's how you have to be for the rest of your life.
So where is your career taking you next?
Well, right now I'm getting to talk to people like you to publicize the book, to get the word out so people will give it a chance to look at, and like I said, either condemn me or forgive me. And I'm also working on some scripts. That was my original path to Hollywood, was to work on screenplays. So I'm partnering with some folks on some projects that look exciting. Nothing to announce quite yet. And then I'm also looking to help other people with their memoirs. This has been such an incredibly life-changing experience, satisfying experience, that I know a lot of people have stories to tell. And through my website, whenyoustepUponAstar.com, people can contact me if they want to talk about possibly trying to get all their memories onto a page in a book form.
So where can you buy the book at?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm happy to say everywhere. Amazon, you can get hardcover, softcover, or Kindle, Apple Books, and then also on barnesandnoble.com. Barnes & Noble is where I had my book signing last week. They're big supporters of mine. So any of those places, you can get the book in any form that you prefer.
William, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Is there anything you want to tell my audience before you go?
No, just that again, it's loaded with photos. There's an index full of celebrities in the back that I think it goes about 14 pages. So pretty much any celebrity you enjoy, there's a story about them in the book. So go have a look and find your favorites, and then I would love to hear from people what their thoughts were about the book. If they liked it, if they hated it, if they like me, if they hate me, I'm open to it all. I did some bad things back in the day, so I'm ready to take it. Give it to me.
Well, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Good luck on the book and good luck with your future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bill. It was a pleasure. A lot of fun.
Thank you. Hey, a big thank you goes out to William Keck for joining me today and talking about his new book, When You Step Upon a Star. The book is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Apple Books. For more information, stop by his website, whenyoustepUponAstar.com. Well, that's going to wrap it up for yours truly, Bill Alexander. I am out of here. We'll talk to you next time here on The Bill Alexander Show.
Thank you for listening to The Bill Alexander Show. The Bill Alexander Show is a $1 Million Baby production. For more information, go to thebillalexandershow.com.